Another is this one, and I have to admit, this is the most remarkable thing I ever learned. Ocean and wind currents were discovered from this psalm, Psalm 8:8. The birds in the sky and the fish in the sea all swim the paths of the seas. And I just went over that. But remember, David thought, in the Bible, we talk about the ocean above and the ocean below. The sky was one sea, and then the other sea was down here. They didn't differentiate in the way they described. So they're talking about the paths of the seas. They're talking about one up where the birds fly and one down where the fish swim. But what are these paths in the sea? And the Hebrew word is ork, and it actually means a path or a pathway. And it turned out there was a guy by the name, it's Matthew Maury, Fontaine Maury. He's considered to be the father of oceanography. And this is one of his books, is A Physical Geography of the Sea. Maury lived from about 1806 to 1873, and Maury was a U.S. naval officer, and he was a Christian. And this phrase in Psalms caught his attention. And he vowed, he's written in one of his letters, he vowed to find these paths in the sea. And this is kind of an excerpt from one of his writings. It says, I have always found my scientific studies that when I could get the Bible to say anything on the subject, it afforded me a firm platform to stand upon and around in the ladder by which I could safely ascend. As our knowledge of nature and her laws has increased, so has our knowledge of many passages of the Bible improved. The Bible called the earth the round world, yet for ages it was the most damnable heresy for a Christian man to say that the world is round. And finally, sailors circumnavigated the globe and proved that the Bible was right, and saved Christian men of science from the stake. And as for the general system of circulation, which I have been so long endeavoring to describe, the Bible tells it all in a single sentence. That's Matthew Maury in one of his books, basically saying, in a single sentence, it described it. So what happened is he started measuring the temperature of the ocean when he was out. And he was able to find effectively what he calls the rivers of the seas. These are the currents that we now take for granted. And what's amazing is these are rivers with stronger flow than any river on land. And it has changed navigation forever because they were able to map these currents, which helps navigation, right? So you're going with the flow, especially. So these are basically like liquid channels in the oceans, and they circulate. And my kids just learned about this in science. But no one ever thought to look for it until Matthew Maury read his Bible. And that's where modern navigation comes from. Pretty cool, huh? I have to admit. So, do you know what navigators originally were called on boats? Pathfinders. You know how they got the name? Psalm 8:8. Matthew Maury coined the term, and it stuck today. They still call them pathfinders. Yeah, finding the path. It also includes wind currents, and we'll talk about that in a couple seconds, but he also discovered the wind currents, which again makes aviation possible. Without an understanding of those wind currents, it would change everything. Cool, huh?
It is pretty cool. When you think about the birds, they instinctively know to follow those wind currents.
Yep. And when they're going the opposite direction, they know to stay out of the major currents. It's really amazing. And the creatures knew it. God knew it, but it took us a lot of time to catch up to it. But hidden science in the Bible. Another example is geology. I would have missed this one. I had to have someone point it out to me. But the earth, from it comes food, and underneath it is turned up as fire. Its rocks are the source of sapphires, and its dust contains gold. That's from Job. If you think about it, the ancient man didn't know that everything under our foot was molten fire, but Job did. He knew that pressure and that temperature actually is what creates sapphires, believe it or not. That is the source of sapphires. It's actually pretty well described. Yeah, it's pressure and temperature. That's how sapphires come into being. So in a really simple sentence, but God is I never realized how much science was accurately depicted in the book of Job. And when God is speaking, we think it's poetic, and it's often talked about as a poetic book, but it's very scientifically accurate, which is just amazing.
It sure did take them a long time to catch on.
Yeah, well, another one's astrophysics. I love astronomy. Job 26:7 says, He spreads out the northern skies over empty space. He suspends earth over nothing. It doesn't sound like very much to us, but there was not a single ancient culture that thought this. The typical ancient culture was something like this. This is a picture of the Hindu depiction of the world, where it's being supported by a turtle or elephants. Some of the Chinese culture, it's like a goldfish or a koi fish. The Greek culture had it on Atlas's back. It was always something was on the foundations of that held up the earth. The Bible is the only ancient text, with no exceptions, that depicts the world as being suspended. There's no exception. And there's a reason for that. And I like this picture. This is taken from the moon, right? And you can kind of, it's just like suspended over nothing. And it is. It's really, it's just, we're just hanging out there in space. But that we understand in modern science why that is. But the book of Job may be written 4,000 or 6,000 years ago is got that science that frankly until it wasn't until the age of the modern age of telescopes and rockets that we actually understood this. Another one is out of Isaiah. It says, He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like the tent to live in. The ancient people didn't know the earth was round. In fact, there was no cultures that thought the earth was round, except for the ancient Jewish people, which is pretty amazing.
Did ancient people think they could just get to a certain point and fall?
Yeah. If you read any of the ancient texts, including like holy books like the Quran, they talk about the falling off the edge of the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh, you fall off the earth. I mean, the Iliad and the Odyssey all talk about the end of the earth and you falling off. I mean, anything we have, the old Chinese Proverbs talk about there being an end of the earth. It doesn't matter what culture you come from. It's really just the Judeo-Christian that has the concept of a round earth. So it's very cool stuff. And modern man started figuring this out in the 1500s. So it hasn't been that long. And we didn't really understand it probably until the 1800s maybe. It was still considered a heresy within the church at some. And this idea of he stretches out the heavens like a canopy is an interesting phrase, and I never really thought about this, but this is kind of we believe in expanding universe, but this is the only ancient text that has this concept of the sky as being stretched out. There's nothing like that. Every other ancient text talks about an eternal universe. Yet
it's not that we believe, it's what they found out, that the universe is stretching.
Yeah. modern science is just, we've just kind of got to that point because they used to think eternal universe or this, and now everybody's kind of got to the point where the telescopes are too powerful and we can't really argue against what we observe, which is an expanding universe. So the Bible is unlike any other book that's ever been written today or in any ancient times, and you can see how God is actually revealing Himself through truths that people could witness, and that people through all history are going to witness. At each stage in our history, we've discovered things that actually show us the Bible is actually telling us the truth. Here's one that I thought was kind of cool. Job 38:31. Can you direct the movements of the stars and bind the cluster of Pleiades or loosen the cords of Orion? This is God talking to Job, right? I've read this a whole bunch of times, and I'm like, okay, yeah, but this is really cool. So the Pleiades is also called the Seven Sisters constellation. It's actually more than 250 stars. There are about 100, the cluster itself is about 444 light years away from us. From one side to the other, it's almost 13 light years, so it's a gigantic space, okay? All of these stars are moving in the same direction at exactly the same speed. So when God says, can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades, He literally has done it. The Pleiades will be bound together for as long as the universe exists, moving exactly at the same speed, exactly the same direction. There's nothing else in the universe like it. That's pretty cool. But the second one is Orion's my favorite constellation. You can always find the three in the center, right? The belt of Orion. In the New King James it says, or loose the belt of Orion. Some translations say the cords of Orion. They mean the belt of Orion. It's like, okay, so what's God mean when He's telling Job you can loosen the belt of Orion? So I'm going to play you a little video clip of Warner Wallace, just because I like his video depiction of this, and just watch this. When I saw this, I was like, that is so cool.
It's almost as though God is doing the same thing with this constellation. Now, see if you can loosen the bands of Orion. Oh, what is Orion? Here's the Orion constellation. The bands. What are the bands? What are you talking about there? Well, the band of Orion is this belt, and it's made up of 3 stars: Mintaka, Alnilam, and Alnitak. Almost like God is saying, hey, Job, you think you're this good? You can loosen these bands? I can loosen them. And sure enough, this is a very different situation than Pleiades. Garrett Service is a famous astronomer, wrote a book called Curiosities in the Sky. He wrote, today this band consists of an almost perfectly straight line of second magnitude stars that are equally spaced and very beautiful. In the course of time, however, the 2 right-hand stars, Mintaka and Alnilam, will approach each other and form a naked eye double. So in essence, these 2 stars on the right are eventually going to move together and they will form a naked eye double. The other star will drift away eastward so that the band will no longer exist. Unlike Pleiades, from Job's perspective, God can loosen this band. But how would...
So, it's so cool. I mean, it's so easy to read over that. The Pleiades, God can keep it together. 250 stars moving exactly the same speed in exactly the same direction. Nothing else like it that we have ever seen in the universe. Orion, I can loosen the belts. And science has now shown that these suns are actually moving apart in a way that actually looks like you're unbuckling the belt. Okay, that is very, very, very cool. But it doesn't stop. In this same passage, the very next, I think it's the next verse, is this. And I'm going to read out of the King James because it's using the original Hebrew words of Mazaroth and Arcturus. So, canst thou bring forth Mazaroth in its season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Okay, so what is he talking about? I use this one because it used Nazaroth. Nazaroth is the Hebrew word for constellation or constellations. Any guess what God is talking about bringing forth in his season? It's the constellations. So you know, as we watch the seasons, it always rotates and there's always a new constellation in the sky. God is talking about He's going to bring forth the constellations in their season, right here in Job. People actually argue about what Mazaroth means, but I don't understand why, because the Hebrew definition of the word is constellations. It seems pretty obvious to me that he's talking about the seasonal constellation shifts. And then the next part, who can guide Arcturus? And I use the Hebrew word, the modern Bible sometimes use the Great Bear, but they're not referring to the Big Bear constellation. We're talking about a particular star, and it's actually the one that's it's at the bottom of the constellation we call Boots. So what's the deal with Arcturus? Why is God saying, why can you guide Arcturus? What is he trying to get to us that is remarkable about science? Well, let me tell you a little bit about Arcturus. Arcturus is gigantic. That's our sun is over there. You can see Jupiter's like 1 pixel on the sign. Arcturus is huge, incredibly dense. It's like I think it's the 5th brightest star in our night sky. But it's like a bull in a china shop. It is moving incredibly fast. And there is no... Scientists cannot figure out how it moves because it doesn't appear to affect things as it moves by them. It defies all our gravitational laws, all our laws of physics. And a famous astrophysicist, I think he's the head of the Goddard Space Institute, I can't remember what his name was, but he said that Arcturus is like a law all of itself. It defies all of our understanding of astronomy. So who can guide Arcturus other than God? Because God made Arcturus different than everything else. And he said so in the oldest book in the Bible. And I find that just amazing. When I heard that I did some research figuring out what Arcturus was, and it's like, this is just, it's the anomaly of the skies. If you read astronomy books, it's an anomaly. Nobody can figure out what the deal is with this. And God says, well, yeah, you can't figure it out because I'm the one that's guiding it. Pretty cool. So that's astronomy. I just love that. Any questions? I know I've been going through these quick, but I have a lot of them to get through. So I want to kind of hammer through them as I can. But yeah, I mean, the Pleiades, Orion, Arcturus, and Razaroth, they're just... When I heard Wallace present it first, before I did my own research to see what he was talking about, I was like, this is just very, very cool. Another hidden science in the Bible, hydrology. Ecclesiastes 1:7, all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. I mean, if that is a very good description of the water cycle. Flows into the sea, evaporates, condenses, rains back exactly where it came from, right? It's easy to not see it, but when you see it, it's like, oh, that's actually a very good description of the scientific water cycle. Again, hidden science right there in front of our eyes in the Bible. And there's not a scientist that can refute that because that's what it is. Meteorology, Ecclesiastes 1:6. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north, and round it goes, ever returning on its course. That doesn't sound like much, but they had no depiction of this concept. In fact, currents go all the way around the planet, round and round and round. The jet streams, this is true. This is actually exactly what takes place. But they had no way of observing that, yet God gave this knowledge to what I think is Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes, and I think it's easy to miss it, but it's once you see it, you can see that it's an accurate description of the way science is known today. And this is one of the scriptures that Maury used along with Psalm 8:8 when he was looking to try to determine the wind currents, because it was saying they came around, and he actually discovered the jet stream. In addition to the sea currents, he's also the discoverer of the trade winds, which obviously made a big difference in navigation, especially with sailboats at the time. Again, if it wasn't for someone looking in the Bible, I don't know when they might have discovered that. But he used the Bible as his foundation, and this is what he's able to find. Another one, which is maybe, this might be too science, but in physics, we talk about the laws that govern everything in our universe, right? Well, in Job 38, God says, "Do you know the laws of heaven? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth?" Dominion, that's the laws that govern the earth. He's talking about the natural laws. It's not obvious, but when you read more of the passage, that's what God is talking about, how the world runs. And he's showing that there's actually effectively natural laws that the world is based on. There was no understanding of that in the ancient world. That's not until we got to modern science. Another is thermodynamics. This is out of Isaiah 51:6. "Lift up your eyes to the heaven, look at the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants die like flies. But my salvation will last forever. My righteousness will never fail." Oh, this is God speaking. So the earth is going to wear out like a garment. Does anybody know a scientific law that actually says that? Second law of thermodynamics, the entropy, where useful energy is always going away. The universe is actually depleting its supply of useful energy. That's what the second law of thermodynamics is, and here it is in Isaiah 51. It's also in Psalms. Psalm 102 says effectively the same thing. "In the beginning, you laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will be discarded." Now, I don't know how, it's a very clear way to describe second law of thermodynamics in an ancient text. I find it pretty cool. And there's a bunch of others, and I would love to do these all day, but I know we have limited time. But I'm just going to touch on a bunch of them real fast. Physiology is talked about in Leviticus 17:11, and it talks about the fact that the life of in the blood, right? Anatomy is talked about in Psalm 139, which talks about you being knit together in your mother's womb, embryo growth. Health is talked about in Leviticus 15:13, where it's talking about why you want to wash your hands in running water. We know that in modern medicine, that if you wash in the same pool of water over and over again, it actually is not washing at all, right?
It's a big push in the hospital that you have to wash your hands.
Yep.
We get dinged if you don't wash your hands after you.
Because there's a reason. But I think one of the most remarkable ones, and I did not know this, I labeled it hematology. It's out of Genesis 17:12, when God told them to circumcise the boys on the 8th day. Does anybody know why the 8th day is so special? I did not know this.
The clotting.
It's the day that the clotting factor is at its maximum. It's the highest level, is on the 8th day after birth. The level of vitamin K is at its highest, and something called prothrombin. Is that? Yeah, okay, I can't pronounce it. But all those aid in the ability for that child to handle that procedure, and it's the 8th day. And there's no way anybody in the time of Moses would have known that, yet our modern science has identified why God said that. And I think that's just amazing. So I got one more. Maybe we can do it before we take a break. I got to do it. This one, I just love this one too much. The flood. The flood. Everybody knows this story, but I want to focus in on a part of the story that people have trouble with, which was how much water there was. There's a couple of issues they have with the flood. They'll say first of all, it's like there's no way to get all the animals on the boat. Well, what they failed to understand is it never said you brought adult animals on the boat. And so if you brought baby animals or eggs, you got plenty of room on the boat. And I've seen the boat. There's a copy of it up in Kentucky, and I'll show you a picture in a second. So, okay. They'll talk about... What?
Of each kind, not every species.
Well, exactly. Well, even if you had every species, it's a big boat. But one of the other big knocks is like all these cultures have a flood story. And my response is, yeah, that's because it's happened. That's the reason almost every ancient culture has some rendition of the flood story.
They're descendants of the survivors.
Well, there's only one family, right? If you believe the story. Now, some will say some of these stories are older than the Hebrew story. So was the flood. But the point is, yeah, the Hebrews didn't write theirs down to like 1500 BC. So the fact that there wasn't the first to be written down is not really proof of anything, other than, well, the flood happened and God gave Moses a detailed depiction of what happened. But if you pull all these stories together, you'll find the Bible story buried inside. The boats are different, and I mean this and that, but the point is God destroyed the human race by flood as a punishment, and that is consistent through every one of these stories. And the fact that it is, it's like 270 ancient cultures have flood stories around the world. That's a crazy number. I didn't even know there were 270 ancient cultures around the world. And this is just a few of them. This is a picture of the Ark encounter in Kentucky. If you have not been there, when you see the size of the boat, you're like, it's a big boat. I mean, it's a really big boat. I think for me, it was a good visual to stand next to this and recognize that dimensionally it is really accurate. To call this a boat is maybe going too far. I know Ken Ham made it look like a boat. It's a refuge. It's really, when it's described in the Bible, it's an ark. It's a refuge from the storm. There's no navigation. There's no steering. It's only God. It floated. That's about all we know. So I don't know if it looked like that, but the size is a fairly, it's accurate to what the Bible describes as far as size. And like I said, I mean, if you didn't have to have every single animal, and you just had kinds, which is groups of species, I only had to have canine. I didn't have to have every dog species there ever was. And you didn't have to have adult animals. And God is capable of causing the animals to hibernate while they're on the boat. So they always say, where do you put all the food? And it's like, well, God could probably make it work so you didn't need it. And it's like, well, you're talking about a miracle. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah. What's your point? Of course I'm talking about a miracle.
The miracle that the animals lined up and showed up. Yeah.
So it leaves us with one problem with the flood story, though. And that's the water. And this is a real problem in the flood story. Let me make sure I get this correct. So the skeptics will say, simply, there's not enough water on earth to cover the tallest mountain. So the question that I ask, being a science, is, well, how much water do you need? So I calculated it. You're the first one to calculate it? Well, I've seen the way other people calculate it. I don't know what they're obviously not scientists. People, because their math doesn't make any sense to me at all. So anyway, I put Everest on the side of the Earth over here. Everest is about 8.9 kilometers tall, 29,000 feet, right? So I have to be able to cover Mount Everest with 30 to 40 feet of water. That's what the Bible says. It's 10 cubits, somewhere between 30 and 40 feet. So you can calculate the volume of a sphere. It's volume 4/3 pi r cubed. I know that's math, I'm sorry. Using the U.S. Geological Survey's radius of the Earth at sea level, you can calculate the volume of the Earth, and then I can add the extra distance of Everest to figure out how much water it would take. And it's a lot. You would need roughly 4.5 trillion cubic kilometers of water to cover Mount Everest, above what's in the seas right now. It's a lot of water. You guys know how much water is in the ocean? About 1 trillion. So we're talking about roughly 5 times as much water that's in all the oceans. Good question. They've always said there wasn't very much, but I was reading an article in October of this year. This quote is out of Geoscience World, and they published this article, not knowing what they were publishing because it's just a discovery, right? According to the article, they have discovered an ocean in the mantle that has roughly 5 to 6 times as much water as all the oceans. They estimate it to be about 7 trillion cubic kilometers of water. So if you could pump all that to the surface, do you know how far Everest would be underwater? About 15,000 feet.
Didn't the Bible say that the springs opened up for them to
It did. It did. So not only is there enough water on Earth to cover Everest, you could cover it with 15,000 feet of water.
But it also rained.
And it also rained. The whole point is there's plenty of water on Earth. Okay, how we did it, I can't say, but we can no longer say there. This is a criticism that's been out there for a long time about there's just simply not enough water. But in fact, there's actually plenty of water. And this is just in one discovery. So I read this in another tech journal just last week as some big discovery of all this water under Earth. And I keep saying, it's like, where are the Christians screaming? It's like, no, duh, we already knew this. It's in the Bible. But yeah, I found it very interesting. There are a lot of people that have done this calculation. They say, oh, there's not enough water. But it's like, they always come up with the same number, right around 4 to 5 trillion cubic kilometers. But again, now there's scientific discoveries. And that's not taking into account normal groundwater. That is just this one discovery in the mantle. So there's probably a lot more water, frankly. And actually, from a scientist's perspective, my dad could probably tell you as a geologist, there's a layer of rock in the crust that's like a sponge, and there's a tremendous amount of water trapped in the crust. What's that layer called? Do you remember? And it's considered to be like 30% water. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Okay, why don't we take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about archaeology that has been discovered that, again, supports the Bible.